If you're sick of your trash can being an eyesore, then it's time for this fun upgrade. First, I cleaned my entire garbage can, including the inside, because why not? I made sure to wipe away anything sticky or dirty from the outside and allowed the can to dry completely. Next, I taped off the foot pedal and bar at the bottom, then went in with one coat of the spray paint primer. I allowed that to dry for 45 minutes as directed on the can. Then I did 2 coats of the ivory silk color, allowing adequate dry time in between coats. After the second coat, I allowed the garbage can to dry completely overnight. The next day, I measured the foot pedal on the front of the garbage can and found the center. Then I laid my first strip of 1/4 inch painter's tape onto the front of the garbage can and made sure it was even and as centered as possible. Then I placed a piece of 3/4 inch painter's tape directly next to the first strip, as well as a 1/2 inch piece of tape. Then I placed the next 1/4 inch tape on the edge of the 2 pieces of tape. I continued this method of using the 2 pieces of larger tape to create a gap between the pinstripes all the way around the garbage can until it was covered. For the next step, I spray painted the entire garbage can in 2 coats of a spray paint and primer in the color French blue. Then I carefully removed the pinstripe tape and encountered a few issues with the paint peeling off. So once the paint was dry the next day, I went in and did some touch-ups. Next, I painted some house paint I already had on hand onto this cute floral stamp and stamped it in between the ivory stripes, spacing them out a few inches. I did this on every other blue stripe, mimicking a pretty blue floral wallpaper. Once I was done stamping, I allowed the paint to fully dry, then sprayed 2 coats of a clear sealer and allowed that to dry overnight. Now my trash can is absolutely adorable and matches my home decor so well. I hope this inspires you to paint your trash can to make it less of an eyesore and more of a piece of decor.
I have this cooler, and while it's functional, it could look a whole lot better. I'm going to give it a good sanding with some gritty sandpaper first. Next, I want to put a thin layer of Fusion Ultra Grip all over the blue area. This is going to allow me to paint it and for the paint to stick with no issues or peeling. Now that the Ultra Grip has had time to bond to the surface of the cooler, it's time to start painting it. I want to do the first 2 coats in white so that it matches the lip around the top. I'm basically going to cover everything blue. To add some vintage-inspired stripes to the cooler, I'm going to start taping it off now that the white paint is completely dry. I want the corners to be colored, so I'm going to start by adding stripes right next to them, and then I'll fill in the middle between the ends. With the stripes taped off, I'm going to paint between the tape lines now with a soft, beautiful sagey green color. I'm going to use a small brush for this because I don't want to push any paint under the tape or get outside of the lines. The green paint will need a second coat for it to look uniform, so I'm going to add that now. I can also start to peel off the painter's tape and see what the stripes are going to look like underneath. To finish off my cooler, I want to do something with the boring top. I found this contact paper that looks like wood, and I think this is definitely going to fit with the vintage vibe I'm going for. I've gone ahead and cut a piece of the contact paper down to about the size I'm going to need, and now I want to start sticking it in place. Because the top isn't removable though, it's going to take a little maneuvering to get it around the corners at the back and around the edges. This cooler looks so much better now and fits in perfectly with all my vintage things. I hope this has inspired you to give your cooler a makeover as well.
Time to refresh an old chandelier. To get the color I wanted, I mixed the colors together. Before painting, I cleaned the chandelier from top to bottom. This area has a low ceiling, so I decided not to remove the chandelier. I turned off the electricity from the electrical panel in the garage, and I stood on a very sturdy ladder to gently apply the paint. It only took 35 minutes for me to apply 2 coats of paint to the chandelier. Next, I placed the globes in the sink to wash them. I taped off the top and the inside of the globe. I lightly applied a semi-gloss paint to the outside of the globes. I purchased the paint from Walmart. I then buffed away the residue left behind by the spray paint. I placed the globe on a sheet of paper. I drew a circle. I then cut away the edges of the paper. I folded my circle in half twice, and then I folded it into thirds, 3 equal parts. I placed the globe back onto the circle, and using those fold lines as a guide, I placed marks on the globe. I used those markings to indicate where I would draw vertical lines. I applied the same technique to draw the horizontal lines around the globe. I lightly drew all of the horizontal lines, And then I began to lightly apply the paint as a primer coat. I decided to let the primer coat dry, and then I applied several other coats thereafter. I lightly applied the Mod Podge Sealer. It dries in minutes. Now I have the springtime whimsy that I have been looking for.
When I was at Walmart, I saw this wooden round and thought it would be the perfect piece for a painting technique I've been wanting to do. To get the wooden piece ready, I'm going to start by painting the entire thing white. Now I want to start taping off my first set of lines. I'm going to use painter's tape to mark the lines and use the wood slats as my guide. I want to place my first piece of painter's tape right over the middle line. With that piece in place, I can put a piece on either side now and then remove the one in the middle. I'm going to use the thickness of the tape as my guide so that I don't have to measure and mark any of the lines off. I can now use the piece I removed and put it right under that bottom piece and use it as my next guide. I can add a piece below it, and once that's in place, I can remove that middle one again and keep using it as my spacer. I'm going to do this until I've covered the entire board. Now it's time to paint that first layer of stripes onto the board. I'm going to use a lavender color for this layer. I want to make sure and cover up all the white that's showing between the tape lines, and then I'll let it completely dry before moving on. Now that the paint's dry, I can remove all these tape lines. To make the second layer of stripes, I want to start by marking the middle of the wooden circle. The stripes are going to go across the first ones, so there's no slats this time to line that first piece of tape up to. Now I can place my first piece of tape right over the mark I made. I'm going to fill this board completely the same way I did for the first layer of stripes, using the tape thickness as my guide. With all of the tape laid down, I'm going to use the same lavender color I used for the first layer to paint all the spaces on this second layer. Now that the second layer of paint is dry, it's time for the final layer. I don't want to peel the tape off this time though. I want to lay a layer of tape right over top of it. I'm going to use the lines that I can see through my paint as my guide. I want to lay the tape down in the same places I had it on the very first layer. I can paint my final layer of paint now, and I'm going to use a dark plum color. Now that the paint's dry, I can begin to remove all of the pieces of tape. As I remove each piece, you can start to see the layers of white and lavender and plum, creating a beautiful gingham pattern. Since there were several layers of tape, there were a few little spots where the paint slipped under it. I can easily touch these up though with a small artist's brush. To finish off my piece, I'm going to take some greenery and wrap the stems with some stringy purple beads. I can then attach the bunch right to the board and it's ready to hang. I really love how pretty the purple gingham pattern looks on the rustic board. It's the perfect backdrop for the greenery. I hope this has inspired you to try painting gingham as well. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Home Talk. I'll see you next time.